Marcus Johnson worked as a janitor at the prestigious Harrington Hotel, where he quietly maintained the grand ballrooms and lobbies. At 32, he kept to himself, his past unknown to his coworkers. Each day he arrived before dawn, changed into his gray uniform, and went about his work with careful precision. The Harrington wasn't just any hotel. It hosted galas for the wealthy, charity events for the elite, and parties for celebrities. The marble floors always shined under his care, and the brass fixtures gleamed after he polished them. One evening in late autumn, while cleaning the empty ballroom after a charity gala for children's education, most guests had left except for a small group lingering near the grand piano. Among them stood Victoria Blackwell, a billionaire real estate developer known for her sharp tongue and sharper business deals. Her laughter echoed through the ballroom as she sipped champagne with friends dressed in outfits that cost more than what Marcus earned in 3 months. Marcus moved carefully around them, emptying small trash bins and wiping down surfaces. He tried to be invisible as he'd learned to be during his years at the Harrington. The rich preferred their service staff to be like ghosts, present when needed, unseen otherwise. He'd nearly finished his work when his cleaning cart bumped against the leg of the grand piano, causing a soft but noticeable thud. The conversation stopped. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly, adjusting his cart. "I'll be more careful." Victoria Blackwell stepped forward, her silk gown rustling with each movement. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized her sharp features. Diamond earrings caught the light as she tilted her head to examine Marcus. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, resting one manicured hand on the piano's glossy black surface. "A Steinway concert grand piano, ma'am," Marcus answered, eyes downcast. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, the janitor knows about pianos?" Her friends chuckled, the sound making Marcus's ears burn. He'd learned long ago that responding to such comments only made things worse. Instead, he continued wiping down a nearby table. "This isn't just any Steinway," Victoria continued, circling the instrument like a cat. "This is a Model D concert grand, worth more than you'll probably make in your lifetime." One of her friends, a man with silver-streaked hair and a tailored suit, raised his glass. "Vicky, leave the poor man alone. He's just doing his job." "I'm simply educating him, Charles," she replied with a dismissive wave. "Knowledge is power, after all. Isn't that what tonight's gala was about? Education for all?" This earned more laughter. Marcus kept his face neutral, though his grip on the cleaning cloth tightened. He'd encountered people like Victoria Blackwell before, people who believed their wealth gave them the right to treat others however they pleased. Victoria suddenly struck a dramatic pose beside the piano. "You know, my father made me take lessons for 15 years. 15 years. I hated every minute." She ran her fingers carelessly across the keys, producing a discordant sound that made Marcus wince inwardly. Such a waste of time for a businesswoman. She turned back to Marcus, who was now trying to finish his work quickly so he could leave. Something about his silence seemed to annoy her further. "Tell me, janitor, do you play?" she asked. "No, ma'am," Marcus lied. It was easier than telling the truth. "Pity," she said with mock sympathy. "Music is supposed to elevate the soul, though I suppose some souls need more elevation than others." Her friend shifted uncomfortably now, sensing she'd gone too far, but Victoria was enjoying herself too much to stop. "I have a wonderful idea," she announced, clapping her hands together. "A little game to end our evening." Marcus looked up reluctantly, knowing he was somehow about to become part of this game. Victoria patted the piano bench with exaggerated ceremony. "If you can play this piano, really play it, not just bang on it like a child, I'll marry you on the spot." The room fell silent. Even her friends looked shocked at the crudeness of the joke. "Victoria," the silver-haired man said quietly, "that's enough." But Victoria's eyes remained fixed on Marcus, a challenging smile on her red lips. "What do you say, janitor? One melody might change your life forever. From rags to riches, just like in the fairy tales." Marcus felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Pride, anger, and beneath it all, a flicker of the passion he'd once felt sitting before keys very much like these. For a moment, he considered sitting down and showing her exactly what he could do. His fingers almost twitched with the memory of Chopin, Bach, and Rachmaninoff. He could still play from memory the pieces that had once earned him standing ovations. Instead, he simply nodded once and said, "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to finish my rounds." Victoria's smile faltered slightly. She'd expected embarrassment, maybe even anger. Instead, she got calm dignity, which somehow made her feel like the smaller person. She recovered quickly, turning to her friends with a laugh. "Well, can't blame a girl for trying to find a husband, though I think I'll stick to dating apps rather than hotel staff." As Marcus wheeled his cart toward the exit, he heard one of her friends mutter, "That was cruel, Vicky. Even for you." "Oh, please," Victoria replied loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "He'll have a story to tell his friends now. The time a billionaire proposed to me, I practically did him a favor." The double doors closed behind Marcus as he entered the service hallway. Only then did he allow his shoulders to slump slightly. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes and taking deep breaths until his heartbeat steadied. Working at the Harrington meant dealing with the Victorias of the world, people who saw him as part of the furniture, or worse, as entertainment. Usually, he let their comments roll off him like water. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't exactly say why. Perhaps it was because she'd unknowingly touched on the very thing he'd given up. The piano wasn't just an expensive piece of furniture to him, it had once been his whole world. When his shift ended an hour later, Marcus changed back into his street clothes, worn jeans and a faded blue sweater that had seen better days. As he walked through the employee exit into the cool night air, he couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's mocking challenge. "Play this piano. I'll marry you." The absurdity of it almost made him laugh now that he was away from her, as if marriage to someone like her would be a prize instead of a punishment. Still, as he waited at the bus stop under the glow of a streetlight, his fingers moved against his thigh, silently playing the opening notes of Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 16 in C major. He hadn't touched a proper piano in years. The small electric keyboard in his apartment was a poor substitute for the magnificent Steinway back in the ballroom. The last bus of the night arrived with a hiss of brakes. Marcus climbed aboard, nodding to the driver who recognized him from his regular late-night commute. As the bus pulled away from the glittering downtown district toward the more modest neighborhood where Marcus lived, he stared out the window at the passing city lights. He thought about his mother and how proud she'd been when he received his acceptance letter to the music conservatory. How she'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for his education. How her illness had changed everything. Sometimes life forced hard choices. He'd made his and lived with it every day. But tonight, Victoria Blackwell's mockery had stirred something he'd tried to bury, a longing for the life he might have had. The bus turned onto his street, and Marcus pulled the cord for his stop. As he stepped off the bus and walked the short distance to his apartment building, he decided that tomorrow would be just another day. He would clean the ballroom as usual, and if Victoria Blackwell appeared again, he would be invisible, professional, and silent. But deep down, a small voice whispered that somehow he would sit at that piano again, and when he did, people like Victoria Blackwell would finally see him, really see him for the first time. Victoria began noticing the janitor during her frequent visits to the hotel. There was something about him that caught her attention, perhaps the way he carried himself with quiet dignity despite how the wealthy guests often treated him as invisible. He never complained, never seemed bothered, just went about his work with careful attention to detail. 3 weeks after their first encounter, Victoria returned to the Harrington for a business dinner. She arrived early, hoping to review some documents before her associates showed up. The hotel manager escorted her to a private dining room, where she settled at the polished table and spread out her papers. "Would you like something to drink while you wait, Ms. Blackwell?" the manager asked. "Just water for now," she replied without looking up. "And make sure no one disturbs me for the next 30 minutes. The manager nodded and backed out of the room, closing the door quietly. Victoria tried to focus on the contract before her, but found her mind wandering. Through the partly open door, she caught a glimpse of someone passing by, the janitor from the ballroom, pushing his cart down the hallway. Almost without thinking, Victoria rose and stepped to the doorway. "You there?" she called. He stopped and turned toward her voice. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but his expression remained neutral. "Yes, ma'am? You're the one from the ballroom that night. With the piano," he nodded once. "Can I help you with something?" Victoria studied him with newfound curiosity. In the bright hallway light, she nodded. iced details she'd missed before. His uniform was worn but immaculately clean. His hands, though clearly used to manual labor, had long fingers that seemed somehow out of place for a janitor. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Michael, ma'am." "Michael," she repeated as if testing how it sounded. "Do you work here every day, Michael?" "6 days a week," he replied. "Is there a problem with the cleaning service?" Victoria shook her head. "No, everything's fine." She paused, then added, "I've been thinking about our little interaction a few weeks ago." Michael's expression remained carefully blank. "I should get back to work, ma'am." "Of course," Victoria said, suddenly aware of the power imbalance between them. She was keeping him from his job, a job he could lose if he seemed disrespectful to an important guest. "Don't let me keep you." As he pushed his cart away, Victoria found herself strangely unsettled. She'd meant her piano challenge as a joke, a way to amuse her friends. But now she wondered if she'd been unnecessarily cruel. Over the next few weeks, Victoria found reasons to visit the Harrington more frequently. She told herself it was because she enjoyed the atmosphere, or because it was convenient for business meetings. But each time, her eyes would search for Michael, watching him from a distance as he worked. One evening, she overheard a conversation between 2 hotel staff members. "Did you hear? The pianist for tonight's anniversary event just canceled. Food poisoning or something," one said. "That's terrible. The Hendersons have been planning this for months." 50 years of marriage is a big deal," the other replied. "Managers trying to find a replacement, but on such short notice." Victoria rounded the corner to see who was speaking, a receptionist and a waiter, both looking worried. They straightened immediately when they saw her. "Is everything all right, Ms. Blackwell?" the receptionist asked. "Fine," Victoria replied. "I couldn't help overhearing about the pianist problem." "Yes, it's quite unfortunate," the receptionist said. "The Hendersons specifically requested classical music for their anniversary dinner. Mr. Henderson proposed to Mrs. Henderson 50 years ago after taking her to a symphony." Victoria nodded, an idea forming in her mind. "When is the event?" "It starts in 2 hours in the small ballroom." "I see," Victoria said thoughtfully. "Carry on then." She walked away, her mind made up. Finding the hotel manager wasn't difficult. He was in his office, phone pressed to his ear, looking increasingly frustrated. "No, I understand you're booked." "Yes, thank you anyway." He hung up and noticed Victoria standing in the doorway. "Ms. Blackwell." "What can I do for you?" "I hear you have a problem with tonight's anniversary celebration." The manager sighed. "Unfortunately, yes. Our pianist canceled last minute and I can't find a replacement. The Hendersons are longtime patrons and I hate to disappoint them." Victoria smiled. "I might have a solution. Your janitor, Michael. Have you seen him around?" The manager looked confused. "Michael? What about him?" "Just find him and send him to the small ballroom," Victoria said. "Trust me on this." Still bewildered, the manager picked up his phone to call housekeeping. Victoria made her way to the small ballroom, where staff were putting finishing touches on the decorations. Golden balloons floated near the ceiling, and photographs of the Hendersons through the years decorated the walls. A baby grand piano sat in the corner, waiting for a pianist who wouldn't be coming. When Michael entered the ballroom 15 minutes later, he looked confused. "Ms. Blackwell, the manager said you wanted to see me." Victoria stood by the piano, an enigmatic smile on her face. "Do you remember what I said to you the first night we met, Michael?" He stiffened slightly. "You said several things, ma'am." "I made you an offer," she continued, patting the piano. "Play this piano, I'll marry you. It was a joke at your expense, and I apologize for that. But now I'm curious, can you play?" Michael's eyes darted around the room, noting the anniversary decorations. "Is this some kind of test?" "The Hendersons need a pianist for their 50th anniversary celebration," Victoria explained. "Their hired musician canceled. I have a feeling you might be able to help." "What makes you think I play?" he asked cautiously. Victoria shrugged. "Call it intuition. The way you looked at this piano that night. The way you hold your hands. Am I wrong?" For a long moment, Michael stood silently. Then slowly he walked toward the piano. "I haven't played in public for years," he said quietly. "But you can play." Victoria pressed. Michael sat down on the bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed his hands on the keys. Without answering her question, he began to play. The music that filled the room wasn't the simple melody Victoria had expected. It was Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11 in a major, alla turca, played with the skill and emotion of a concert pianist. His fingers flew across the keys, bringing the complicated piece to life with apparent ease. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth slightly open in astonishment. The staff who had been arranging flowers and setting tables stopped to listen. Equally amazed, Michael played as if he'd forgotten where he was, his eyes half closed, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. When the piece ended, the room remained silent for a moment before erupting in spontaneous applause. He looked up, seeming almost surprised to find an audience. His eyes met Victoria's, and for the first time she saw him smile, a small, genuine expression that transformed his face. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he could answer, the hotel manager rushed in, his face lit with excitement. "That was incredible. Michael, I had no idea you could play like that. Would you consider playing for the Hendersons tonight? We'll pay you, of course, above your regular salary." Michael hesitated, looking from the manager to Victoria. "I don't have proper clothes," he said finally. "Not for this kind of event." "We can find you something," the manager assured him eagerly. "Please, it would mean so much to the Hendersons." "I'll do it," Michael said after a pause. "On one condition." He glanced at Victoria. "No one mentions that I work here as a janitor. Tonight I'm just a pianist." The manager nodded enthusiastically. Of course. Come with me, we'll find you a suitable outfit." As they left the ballroom, Michael passed close to Victoria. "Thank you," he said softly. Victoria shook her head. "I did nothing. That talent is all yours." That evening, Victoria lingered at the hotel, watching from a distance as Michael, dressed in a borrowed suit that fit him surprisingly well, played for the Hendersons and their guests. His music selection was perfect for the occasion, romantic classical pieces that brought tears to Mrs. Henderson's eyes. The elderly couple sat near the piano, holding hands and occasionally sharing knowing smiles as the music transported them back through their 50 years together. News of the amazing pianist spread quickly through the hotel. Guests from other areas drifted into the small ballroom to listen. Victoria noticed how differently people looked at Michael now, with admiration, respect, even awe. The same people who would have walked past him without a glance when he wore his janitor's uniform. When Michael played the final piece of the evening, Debussy's Clair de Lune, the room was packed. The haunting, delicate melody seemed to hold everyone spellbound. Victoria found herself moved in a way she hadn't expected, a strange tightness in her chest as she watched Michael's transformation. As the applause faded and guests began to leave, Victoria approached the piano where Michael still sat, his fingers resting lightly on the keys. "You play like Mozart?" she said simply. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Is that a proposal, Ms. Blackwell?" he asked, with just the faintest hint of irony in his voice. For the first time in years, Victoria Blackwell found herself without a quick comeback. She laughed instead, not the practiced social laugh she used at parties, but a genuine sound of surprise and delight. "I think I deserve that," she admitted. "But I am curious. Who are you really, Michael? No ordinary janitor plays like that." Michael stood, straightening the cuffs of his borrowed jacket. "Maybe someday I'll tell you," he said. "For now I should change back into my uniform. Morning comes early." As he walked away, Victoria realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. The janitor she had mockingly challenged weeks ago had just challenged her back, and in doing so, had made himself impossible to ignore. News of the janitor pianist spread through high society circles like wildfire. The morning after the Henderson anniversary, hotel guests who had witnessed Michael's performance couldn't stop talking about it. By afternoon, social media posts featuring shaky phone videos of him playing Debussy had thousands of views. Within days, local news outlets picked up the story, drawn to its Cinderella-like appeal. "Mysterious hotel employee stuns guests with classical piano skills," read one headline. The Harrington's manager, sensing a publicity opportunity, placed the baby grand piano in the main lobby and encouraged Michael to play during his breaks. At first, Michael refused, preferring to keep his two worlds separate. But as interest in his story grew, he reluctantly agreed to short performances twice a week. Victoria found herself returning to the hotel on those days, sitting quietly in the back of the lobby, watching as crowds gathered to hear him play. She noticed how he transformed when his fingers touched the keys. His shoulders straightened, his face relaxed, and something in his eyes came alive. 2 weeks after the Henderson anniversary, a reporter from the city's arts magazine approached Michael after his performance. "That was extraordinary," the young woman said, notebook in hand. "Would you mind answering a few questions? Our readers would love to know more about you." Michael glanced toward the manager, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm not sure what there is to tell," Michael said. The reporter smiled. "Let's start with the basics. Your full name?" "Michael Thomas. And your musical background?" "Where did you train?" Michael hesitated. "I studied piano from a young age, formally." "At a conservatory?" "Yes," he admitted after a pause. "I attended Juilliard for 2 years." The reporter's eyebrows shot up. "Juilliard? But how did you end up working at—" "That's all I want to say about that," Michael interrupted gently but firmly. "If you want to ask about the music I play, I'm happy to discuss that." From her seat at the back of the lobby, Victoria watched this exchange with growing curiosity. She'd suspected Michael had formal training. No one played like that without years of education. But Juilliard was the most prestigious music school in the country. What had happened to bring him from there to cleaning floors at the Harrington? The next day, the article appeared online. "From Juilliard to Janitorial, the mysterious pianist of the Harrington Hotel." Despite Michael's reluctance to share his story, the reporter had done some digging. The article revealed that Michael Thomas had indeed been a rising star at Juilliard over a decade ago, winning several student competitions before suddenly disappearing from the music scene. Victoria read the article on her phone during a meeting, ignoring her financial advisor's droning voice as she scrolled through the comments. Many expressed shock that someone with such talent would end up as a janitor. Others speculated about what might have happened: drugs, mental health issues, criminal trouble. The ugliness of these assumptions made Victoria uncomfortable. That evening, she waited until after Michael's lobby performance to approach him. Most of the crowd had dispersed, but a few lingering admirers asked for photos, which he politely declined. When he noticed Victoria, he nodded in acknowledgement. "Ms. Blackwell." "The article doesn't do you justice," she said, holding up her phone with the story displayed. "They make it sound like some kind of tragedy." Michael's expression remained neutral. People like neat stories with clear explanations. "And your story isn't neat?" "Life rarely is," he replied. Victoria looked around at the now empty lobby. "Would you have dinner with me tonight?" she asked suddenly. Surprise flickered across his face. "Why?" It was a fair question, and one Victoria wasn't entirely sure how to answer. "Because I'd like to apologize properly for how I behaved when we first met," she said finally. "And because I'm curious about you." Michael studied her for a moment. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because despite this," he gestured toward the piano, "I'm still the janitor, and you're still Victoria Blackwell." The way he said her name carried no judgment, just a statement of fact, a reminder of the vast difference in their social positions. "Just dinner," Victoria insisted. "As two people who appreciate music," Michael seemed to consider this. "I finish my shift at 9, he said finally. "I'll wait." At 9:30, they sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant several blocks from the hotel. Michael had changed from his uniform into jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes occasionally darting around as if checking for anyone who might recognize them together. "You can relax," Victoria said, sipping her wine. "No one here cares who I have dinner with." "I doubt that's true," Michael replied. "But it's not you I'm worried about. I'd rather my co-workers didn't know I'm having dinner with the woman who publicly mocked me." Victoria winced. "I deserve that. It wasn't meant as an attack," he said. "Just a fact." The waiter brought their food, pasta for her, lasagna for him. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. "Why did you leave Juilliard?" Victoria asked finally. "The article said you were doing well there." Michael set down his fork. "My mother got sick. Cancer, terminal. I was her only family, so I came home to take care of her." "I'm sorry," Victoria said softly. "That must have been difficult." "It was what needed to be done," Michael replied simply. "She'd sacrificed everything to get me there. Worked 2 jobs, sold our house for something smaller. When she needed me, there was no question about what I would do. But after she passed, why not go back?" Michael shook his head. "It's not that simple. I'd been away from formal training for nearly 2 years. My scholarship was gone. And the medical bills, he trailed off. Let's just say priorities change. Victoria thought about her own mother, who had hired nannies to raise her while she built her first real estate empire. They still spoke weekly, but their conversations revolved around business and social events, never anything personal. You play beautifully, she said. Anyone can see you have exceptional talent. Thank you. Have you thought about trying to return to music professionally? Now that people have noticed you, is that why you invited me to dinner? Michael interrupted. To offer charity? To fix my life? Victoria blinked, taken aback by his directness. No, because I don't need fixing, Ms. Blackwell. My life might seem small to you, but it's mine. I clean during the day, and I play for myself at night on a keyboard in my apartment. It's enough, is it? Victoria challenged. Is that why you agreed to play in the lobby? Because playing for an audience means nothing to you? Michael was silent for a moment. I miss it, he admitted quietly. The connection with listeners. The way music can make people feel things they didn't expect to feel. Victoria nodded. I could help you. Not charity, an investment. I know people in the arts community. One phone call and I could arrange an audition with the symphony or a recital at... Stop, Michael said firmly. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but no. If I return to music, it will be on my terms, not because a wealthy patron decided to discover me. Victoria felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She wasn't used to being refused, especially when offering help. I'm sorry, she said stiffly. I didn't mean to offend you. Michael's expression softened. You didn't. But I need you to understand something. What happened that night at the Henderson anniversary wasn't about proving anything to you or anyone else. I played because I love music and because those people deserve something beautiful for their celebration. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. The rest of the dinner passed with safer conversation. Michael spoke about composers he admired. Victoria shared stories from her travels. By the time they finished dessert, tiramisu for him, nothing for her, the initial tension had eased. Outside the restaurant, Victoria hesitated before saying goodnight. The hotel is hosting a charity event next month, she said, for music education in public schools. Would you consider performing? As a featured artist, not an employee. We would pay you, of course. Michael considered this for a moment. I'll think about it. That's not a no, Victoria observed with a small smile. It's not a yes either, he replied. But his eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before. As they parted ways, he to catch the bus, she to her waiting car, Victoria found herself thinking about the strange path that had brought them together. First her cruel joke, then his surprising talent, and now this tentative connection that felt nothing like the superficial relationships filling her social calendar. The next morning, Victoria called the hotel manager and requested that Michael be released from his regular duties to practice for the charity event, with full pay, which she would cover personally. When the manager hesitated, concerned about finding a replacement, Victoria doubled the amount. Just make it happen, she said before hanging up. A week later, she received a text message from an unknown number. I'll play at your charity event. And thank you for the practice time. Victoria found herself smiling at her phone, an unfamiliar feeling spreading through her chest. It wasn't the satisfaction of getting her way, which she was well accustomed to. It was something else, something warmer and less certain. For the first time in years, Victoria Blackwell was genuinely looking forward to something that had nothing to do with business or social standing. The janitor pianist had somehow cleaned away some of the tarnish on her own heart, and she wasn't quite sure what to make of that. Victoria found herself drawn to Michael beyond his musical talent. In the weeks leading up to the charity event, she visited the hotel almost daily, often lingering in the small practice room the manager had arranged for him. At first she made excuses, checking on event details, discussing the program, but soon both recognized these pretexts for what they were. You're distracted today, Victoria observed one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe as Michael worked through a difficult passage from Chopin's Ballade No. 1. He stopped playing, flexing his fingers. Just tired. I was up late practicing. Victoria stepped into the room, closing the door partly behind her. You don't have to perfect every piece, you know. The people at this event aren't music critics. I have standards for myself, Michael replied, not unkindly. Besides, it's been years since I performed a full program. My fingers aren't what they used to be, Victoria smiled. They sound pretty remarkable to me. He glanced up at her, a question in his eyes. Why are you doing all this? All what? This charity event. Paying for my practice time. Coming here every day. Victoria moved closer to the piano, running her fingers lightly over its polished surface. The charity is legitimate. Music education changed your life. It could change others too. And the rest? Michael pressed. Victoria considered deflecting with a joke or changing the subject, tactics she'd perfected in boardrooms and at dinner parties. Instead, she found herself answering honestly. I'm not entirely sure, she admitted. I'm trying to understand something. What's that? How someone can have so little yet seem so... She searched for the right word. Complete. Michael's expression shifted to surprise, then thoughtfulness. Is that how I seem to you? Victoria nodded. My whole life has been about accumulating things, buildings, companies, influence. I own 6 properties I rarely visit. I have clothes in my closet with tags still attached. But watching you play that first night with nothing but borrowed clothes and borrowed time at the piano, you seemed more alive than anyone I've ever known. Michael was quiet for a long moment. That's not fair to either of us, he said finally. My life isn't simple or pure because I'm not wealthy. I worry about rent and medical bills. I get frustrated when the bus runs late. I'm not some spiritual guide showing the rich how to be happy with less. Victoria felt her cheeks flush. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Michael interrupted gently. Rich people have been romanticizing poverty for centuries. It's easier than acknowledging the system that keeps things unequal. The bluntness of his words stung, but Victoria found herself nodding. You're right. I apologize, Michael's expression softened. But if you're asking if music gives me something money can't buy, yes, it does. When I play, nothing else matters. Not the past, not the future, just the notes under my fingers. That's a kind of freedom I wouldn't trade for anything. Victoria moved to the window, looking out at the city below. I used to feel that way about building, she said quietly. My first development project was a small apartment complex. I was on site every day, watching it grow from nothing to something people could call home. That feeling, she shook her head. I've been chasing it ever since with bigger and bigger projects. But somewhere along the way, it became about the numbers instead of the creating. When she turned back, Michael was watching her with new interest. Why real estate? He asked. Victoria smiled slightly. My father was a contractor. Small jobs, residential mostly. He'd take me to work sites when I was little. I loved the smell of fresh lumber, the sound of hammers. He taught me to read blueprints before I could read books. He must be proud of your success. He died before I built my first project, Victoria said. Heart attack at 52. But yes, I think he would have been proud. Or terrified. Probably both. Michael laughed. A warm sound Victoria realized she'd rarely heard from him. Parents often feel both about their children's achievements. Did your mother get to hear you play at Juilliard? Victoria asked. Michael nodded, his eyes growing distant. Once, my first year, we flew her in for a student showcase. She wore this bright yellow dress she'd saved for months to buy, sat in the front row and cried through my entire performance. Not sad tears, just overwhelming pride. What did you play? Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Michael said, his fingers moving slightly as if playing the memory. I can still see her face when I finished. Like nothing in her life had ever been more worthwhile than that moment. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. That's beautiful. It is, Michael agreed. That's why I don't regret leaving school to care for her. Music gave us that perfect moment together. Some people never get even one. The conversation shifted then to lighter topics. Favorite composers, memorable performances they'd seen, places they'd traveled. Victoria found herself laughing more than she had in months, surprised by Michael's dry wit and thoughtful observations. When she finally glanced at her watch, nearly 2 hours had passed. I should let you get back to practicing, she said reluctantly. Michael nodded. The event's only 2 weeks away. Victoria moved toward the door, then paused. Would you have dinner with me again tonight? There's a little place near the park that has live jazz on Thursdays. Michael hesitated. Victoria. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and they both noticed. Just dinner, she said quickly. Between friends, Bun, is that what we are? Michael asked. Friends? Victoria smiled. I'd like to be. That evening marked the beginning of a gradual transformation for both of them. Over the following weeks, they met often. For coffee before Michael's practice sessions, for walks in the park on his days off, for dinner at small restaurants where neither of them was likely to be recognized. Victoria found herself looking forward to these meetings more than her business appointments or social engagements. With Michael, she didn't need to calculate her words or maintain her carefully crafted image. She could simply be. Michael, too, seemed to relax in her company. He spoke more freely about his hopes and frustrations, his love of music and his lingering doubts about returning to performance. Sometimes they disagreed, their different life experiences, leading to different perspectives, but these conversations only deepened their connection. What Victoria didn't share was how these meetings were changing her, how she found herself questioning the ruthless business tactics that had built her empire, how she'd begun looking at her own employees differently, wondering about their lives outside work, how she'd started donating anonymously to music programs in underfunded schools. A week before the charity event, Victoria arrived at the hotel to find Michael playing a piece she didn't recognize, something modern and challenging, with complex rhythms and unexpected harmonies. That's beautiful, she said when he finished. I don't think I know it, Michael smiled. You wouldn't, I wrote it. Victoria's eyes widened. You composed too? He shrugged. I used to. This is something I started at Juilliard and recently finished. It's extraordinary, Victoria said sincerely. Will you play it at the event? Michael shook his head. No, I'm sticking to the classics for that. This is... He hesitated. It's personal. What's it called? Michael looked down at the keys. It doesn't have a title yet. Victoria sensed there was more he wasn't saying, but didn't press. Instead, she changed the subject to the final arrangements for the charity gala. The guest list, the program, the other performers who would join him. As the event drew nearer, Michael spent more time practicing and less time with Victoria. She understood his need to prepare, but found herself missing their conversations. The hotel staff had begun to notice their friendship, exchanging knowing glances when Victoria arrived asking for Mr. Thomas. She ignored these looks, just as she ignored the raised eyebrows of her social circle when she declined invitations in favor of simpler evenings with Michael. The night before the charity event, Victoria received a text from Michael. Nervous about tomorrow. Could use a friendly face. Coffee at the usual place. They met at the small cafe 2 blocks from the hotel, sitting at a corner table away from other customers. Michael looked tired, with shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't been sleeping well. Having second thoughts? Victoria asked gently. Michael wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. Not exactly, just realizing how much this means to me. Playing again, properly, in front of people who came specifically to hear music. You'll be wonderful, Victoria assured him. I've heard you practice. It's not just about playing the notes correctly, Michael said. It's about connecting with the audience, making them feel something. That part, I'm not sure I remember how. Victoria reached across the table, touching his hand lightly. When you played for the Hendersons, everyone in that room felt something. You haven't lost that ability. Michael looked at her hand on his, then up at her face. Something in his expression made Victoria's heart beat faster. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said quietly. What wasn't? This, he gestured between them. You and me. Whatever this is becoming. Victoria withdrew her hand slowly. Does it need a definition? People like definitions, Michael replied. They like clear boundaries and explanations. The wealthy patron and the struggling artist. The redemption story. The unlikely friendship. It makes them comfortable. And what would make you comfortable? Victoria asked. Michael was silent for a moment. I don't know, he admitted finally. But I know I don't want to be your project or your charity case. Is that what you think this is? Victoria felt a flicker of hurt. No, Michael said quickly. But it's what others will see. Since when do you care what others think? Michael smiled slightly. Since a brilliant, complicated woman challenged me to play piano and changed everything. The tension between them eased, and they spent the rest of the evening talking about everything except what was clearly growing between them. When they parted outside the cafe, Victoria impulsively leaned forward and kissed Michael's cheek. For luck tomorrow, she said, stepping back quickly. You're going to be amazing. As her car pulled away, Victoria touched her lips, surprised by her own boldness. Tomorrow, Michael would play for a room full of the city's elite, the same people who had walked past him for years without a second glance. Tomorrow, everything would change for him. What Victoria didn't yet realize was how much had already changed for her. 6 months after their first encounter, Victoria organized a special concert to showcase Michael's talent to influential figures in the music industry. The venue wasn't the Harrington Hotel, but the city's most prestigious concert hall, with its perfect acoustics and rich history of legendary performances. Behind the scenes, preparations had been intense. Victoria had hired one of the country's top music publicists, arranged interviews with select journalists, and personally called in favors from old friends who served on arts boards and ran foundations. Michael had taken a leave of absence from the hotel, at Victoria's insistence and with her financial support, to prepare properly. "This is too much," Michael had protested when Victoria first presented the plan. "I don't need all this fuss." "It's not fuss, it's strategy," Victoria had replied with the confidence of someone accustomed to orchestrating large-scale events. One performance for the right people can open doors that would otherwise remain closed for years. Now, as the evening of the concert arrived, Victoria stood in the wings of the stage, watching the auditorium fill with a mixture of society figures, music critics, talent scouts, and ordinary music lovers who had read about the Janitor pianist in local media. Michael was in a dressing room down the hall, having insisted on some time alone before the performance. Victoria respected his request, though she couldn't help worrying. During rehearsals, he'd been brilliant but tense, pushing himself harder than any teacher would have demanded. "Miss Blackwell?" A stagehand approached. "We're almost ready to begin." "The house is full." Victoria nodded, smoothing down her black evening gown, simpler and more elegant than her usual style. Tonight wasn't about her, and she'd dressed accordingly. "Is Mr. Thomas ready?" she asked. "He asked for 5 more minutes." Victoria checked her watch. "That's fine. Tell him I'll be waiting right here when he's ready." The stagehand left, and Victoria took a deep breath, surprised by her own nervousness. She'd arranged countless events over the years: product launches, charity galas, grand openings, but none had felt as important as tonight. When Michael finally emerged from the dressing room, Victoria almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the janitor who had moved quietly through the hotel, and in his place stood a performer, confident, focused, transformed. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that she'd insisted on having made for him, his posture straight, his eyes bright with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. "How do I look?" he asked, adjusting his cuffs. "Like you belong on that stage," Victoria answered honestly. Michael smiled slightly. "I had a good teacher once who said clothes don't make the musician, notes do." "Well, tonight you have both," Victoria said. She hesitated, then added, "Are you ready?" Michael took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The house lights dimmed and the audience fell silent. Victoria squeezed Michael's hand once before the stagehand signaled it was time. "Remember, this is already a success," she whispered. "You've made it here. Everything else is just details." Michael nodded, squeezed her hand in return, then stepped onto the stage. The applause that greeted him was polite but reserved, the standard reception for an unfamiliar performer. Michael bowed once, then took his place at the magnificent grand piano that dominated the stage. For a moment he sat perfectly still, hands resting in his lap, head slightly bowed. Victoria, watching from the wings, held her breath. Then Michael lifted his hands to the keys and began to play. He had chosen to open with Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier, a piece known for its apparent simplicity, but profound depth. The clear, perfect notes filled the concert hall, each one precisely placed yet flowing naturally into the next. Victoria watched the audience as much as she watched Michael. She saw heads tilt in interest, bodies lean forward slightly, the subtle shift that happens when listeners realize they're experiencing something special. From Bach, Michael moved to Chopin, then Debussy, then Rachmaninoff, a program designed to showcase his range and technical skill. With each piece, the connection between performer and audience deepened. Victoria could see it happening, the way Michael's shoulders relaxed, the way his body swayed more freely with the music, the way the audience responded with increasingly enthusiastic applause. By the time he reached the final scheduled piece, Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically demanding works in the piano repertoire, the Atmosphere in the hall had transformed completely. Victoria felt tears in her eyes as Michael's fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed almost supernatural in their beauty. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence, that magical pause when an audience is so moved they forget to applaud. Then the hall erupted in a standing ovation that continued for nearly 5 minutes. Michael bowed, his face flushed with emotion. He looked toward the wings where Victoria stood, and their eyes met in a moment of shared triumph. He bowed once more, then returned to the piano for an encore. But instead of playing another classical piece, Michael began something new, a composition that Victoria recognized from his practice room. The piece he had written himself, the one he had called Personal. It began softly, almost hesitantly, with a simple melody that gradually grew more complex. There was something searching in the music, a question woven through the notes. As it developed, other themes emerged, moments of darkness and struggle giving way to passages of remarkable beauty. Victoria felt her heart racing as she recognized elements of their story in the music. The mocking challenge, the surprise of discovery, the gradual change from antagonism to connection. The audience sat spellbound as the piece built to its conclusion. Not a triumphant finale, but something more nuanced. A resolution that acknowledged both joy and uncertainty. When Michael played the final chord, Victoria realized she was crying. The applause this time was different, deeper, more personal. Michael stood and bowed, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. As he left the stage, Victoria moved to meet him. "That was extraordinary," she whispered. "All of it." Michael nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. They stood together in the wings as the applause continued, the audience clearly hoping for another encore. "You should go back out," Victoria said. "Come with me," Michael replied unexpectedly. Victoria shook her head. "This is your moment, please," he said. "I want to say something, and I want you beside me when I do." Confused but curious, Victoria allowed Michael to take her hand and lead her onto the stage. A murmur of surprise ran through the audience at her appearance, but the applause continued. Michael raised his hands for silence, and gradually the hall quieted. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion Victoria could feel in his grip. "Music has always been my first language, and it means everything to share it with such a responsive audience." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Many of you know part of my story, that I worked as a janitor at the Harrington Hotel, where a chance encounter led to tonight's performance. What you may not know is that the person responsible for that chance is standing right here." He turned slightly toward Victoria, who felt suddenly exposed under the stage lights. 6 months ago, this woman challenged me to play the piano at her hotel. It wasn't a kind challenge, in fact it was meant as a joke at my expense. A ripple of discomfort moved through the audience. Victoria felt her cheeks flush, but Michael continued. She said, and I quote, "If you can play this piano properly, I'll marry you on the spot." Nervous laughter scattered through the hall. Victoria wanted to disappear, but Michael's hand held hers firmly. "I didn't take her up on the offer that night," Michael said with a small smile. "But something important happened between us. Over these past months, as we've gotten to know each other, I've watched this remarkable woman question her assumptions, confront her privileges, and open herself to change in ways that few people with her advantages ever do." The audience was completely silent now, captivated by this unexpected turn. The encore piece I just played is called Victoria's Challenge. I wrote it for her, for us, to capture our unlikely journey from that first night to this moment. Michael turned fully to face Victoria now, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "You once said if I played the piano, you'd marry me. I'm not holding you to that promise," he said with a gentle smile, "but I would like to ask you to dinner, properly this time, not as patron and artist, not as employer and employee, but as two people who've discovered something unexpected in each other." Victoria felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she didn't care who saw them. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to dinner. Yes to whatever comes next." The audience burst into applause again, not just for the music now, but for the human story unfolding before them. As Michael and Victoria left the stage hand in hand, she realized that for the first time in years she had no plan, no strategy, no carefully calculated next move, and somehow, that felt exactly right. In the months that followed, Michael's career flourished. The concert led to recording offers, teaching positions and performance opportunities that he accepted selectively, determined to balance his renewed musical life with time for personal growth. He didn't return to janitorial work, but he insisted on creating a scholarship fund for the children of service workers at the Harrington Hotel, funded by proceeds from his performances. Victoria underwent changes of her own. She remained a successful businesswoman, but her approach shifted. She invested in affordable housing projects and arts education initiatives. She hired people based on potential rather than pedigree. She listened more and commanded less. And exactly 1 year after their first encounter, Victoria and Michael returned to the ballroom where they had met. The Harringtons' manager had offered it for their wedding reception, a gesture that brought their story full circle. As they stood together greeting guests, the grand piano in the corner of the room served as a reminder of how much had changed. No longer was it a symbol of division between them, the expensive object one could afford and the other could only clean. Now it represented the music they had created together, a new composition neither could have written alone. "Happy?" Michael asked quietly, his hand warm against Victoria's back. She looked around at the gathering, a mixture of Michael's former co-workers, Victoria's business associates, musicians, teachers, students, and friends from all walks of life. No separate tables for different levels of guests, no hierarchy of importance, just people celebrating together. "Completely," she answered, and leaned in to kiss the man who had taught her that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, sold, or possessed, only shared.